Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I'm going to be talking about the 1964 British-German science fiction film Frozen Alive. And the film begins by introducing us to doctors Frank Overton and Helen Wieland, who are working together on advanced cryogenic medical technology. The pair's work shows great promise. They have successfully frozen chimpanzees, stored them for 3 months, and then thawed them without any apparent ill effects to the subjects. They're not doing this just for laughs, of course. Their plan is to move to human tests and ultimately to save people who are suffering from incurable diseases by freezing them until such time as their condition can be cured, which is definitely a noble goal, though certainly one where I can see some obvious logistical implementation challenges, which you can expect the film to kind of completely ignore. Now, this is not to say that the film won't throw challenges at the good doctors, just that they'll be of a much more immediate personal nature. First off the rank is the jealousy that Overton's boozy wife Joan feels for Dr. Wieland, which is both exaggerated, because the two doctors obviously do have a bond but have kept their relationship scrupulously platonic, and also hypocritical, since Joan is cheating on her husband with a handsome writer named Tony. The second problem facing doctors Overton and Wieland is that some of their superiors are opposed to commencing human trials and are not allowing them to search for a test subject. Though seemingly unrelated, these two issues are about to combine in a most unexpected and inconvenient manner. Overton volunteers to be the first human test subject and is placed in suspended animation right before his wife is found dead from a gunshot wound and he becomes the prime suspect for her murder. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this was a British German co production, but it had a very different release window in those two nations. In West Germany, as it was at the time, it hit cinemas in 1964, the same year it was made, with an 80-minute runtime. In the United Kingdom, on the other hand, it would not see release until 3 years later, and even then, only after 16 minutes of footage had been cut from it. I've got no idea what the British Board of Film Classification found so objectionable about the film's content, because it's frankly all very mild stuff. Possibly it was to do with Joan Overton's adultery. Whatever their fuddy duddy motivations, and I'm sure they were fuddy duddy, I doubt they had done the film's narrative any favours by basically cutting nearly a quarter of the runtime. And let's be frank, the movie needed all the favours it could get if it was going to really succeed as a work of entertainment. Because while this film has enough positives that I wanted to like it, it is ultimately dragged down by its weaknesses. But let's start with those positives, not least because the film starts with them too. The first act of this film is by far its strongest. The opening scenes shows a strong camaraderie between Doctors Overton and Wieland, with a hint of mutual latent attraction. While neither research ever does anything that is overtly more than friendly, there's definitely a subliminal frisson between the two. It's all very nicely done, both in terms of the scripting and the performances. Leading players Mark Stevens and Marianne Koch might not be household names these days, but both enjoyed solid careers over multiple decades, and their work here shows why. They knew what they were doing. It's at this point that the boozy and embittered Joan makes her appearance, adding a whole new catty sparkle to proceedings. Her clear resentment of Helen Wieland is as deftly depicted as the latent attraction that inspires it. And I like that we see that resentment expressed in different ways depending on who Joan's speaking with. She's very openly accusatory when speaking to her husband, but much more obliquely snide with Helen Wieland. The problem is that having set up this fun, you know, dynamic between these characters, the movie rather loses all momentum. And a big factor in that loss is the sheer amount of plot elements the script has to kind of maneuver into position in order to make its core point of tension, Dr. Overton being accused of murder at a time when he is incapable of responding, actually occur. The entire subplot about institutional resistance to their research exists pretty much entirely to enable this situation to occur, for instance. Even more problematically, the film chooses some very blatant and overly convenient contrivances to push many of these elements into place. While I was deliberately vague before about the circumstances of Joan's death, for instance, the film has no such qualms. It shows every plot point domino fall into place in full detail on screen, which not only takes any mystery out of what really happened, but also serves to underline just how many not especially well justified steps are involved in getting to that point. It creates a situation where a lot of minor things are happening, but they don't feel especially compelling or convincing. The overfill is rather like that of waiting for somebody to finish some filing. You can see there's activity going on, but it's not really engaging to watch, and it doesn't feel like it's really producing anything. Worse still, the events that cause Overton to be suspected of the crime and the subsequent resolution of the case are even more forced and underwhelming. In this video, I've deliberately avoided referring to this film as a science fiction thriller because it is regrettably absent of any thrills. There's also a problem with the science fiction element of the script, not the usual problem of the era, however. In a lot of 1950s and 60s movies, hey, it's science fiction, is practically justification for any kind of weird, wild nonsense. Planets hurtle through interstellar space without any ill effect to the inhabitants. Things like universal translators exist. They're very convenient from a plot perspective, but wildly implausible as a thing that could actually be manufactured, and so on. Basically, science fiction is an excuse to just hand wave stuff away. In Frozen Alive, however, in contrast, the science fiction is really quite restrained. It feels like writer Evelyn Fraser did at least enough research to understand the basic concepts of cryogenic preservation theory and then kept the events of the movie within those concepts. The problem is, though, that the whole existence of the cryogenics research is kind of superfluous to the actual main plot. The premise, Overton is suspected of murdering his wife and he can't defend himself, doesn't actually need any of this cryogenesis stuff. He could be unconscious or absent or some other explanation. Similarly, nothing about he has a female colleague and his wife is jealous really ties into the work that they're doing. The science fiction element of the film feels only tenuously associated with the rest of the story, and it doesn't really go anywhere. The technology could have been better integrated in the plot. For instance, if Overton became suspected of the crime because he was discovered rushing his dying wife to the workplace. I didn't kill her. In fact, I was just trying to save her by freezing her, for instance, would tie the two together much better, still put him in danger of being accused of the crime. Yes, he's now available to defend himself, but to some extent, that's probably better. Anyways, yeah, Frozen Alive has a cool start, but the rest of it is decidedly lukewarm stuff. Yeah, I went there. Next time, the 1948 release, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, is one of the few films to hold a 100% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and many people consider it to feature the best on-screen performance Humphrey Bogart ever gave. I don't like it, so that'll be interesting to talk about. But that is for next time. Until then, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you've seen today's film, let me know what you thought of it.